The stars trembled as 800 warships tore through the fabric of space itself. They emerged from hyperspace like predators breaking through water, their hulls dark and menacing against the endless black. The Velthari Empire had arrived at the edge of the Sol system, and Fleet Commander Zyrax stood on the bridge of his flagship with absolute confidence in his heart. He had done this 17 times before. 17 star systems had fallen to his fleet. 17 species had either submitted to Velthari rule or been erased from existence. The pattern was always the same. First came the fear. Then came the begging. Then came the end. Zyrax saw no reason why this small blue world called Earth would be any different. His 4 eyes scanned the tactical display before him. The humans had detected his fleet almost immediately. Their primitive sensor systems had lit up across the solar system, and he could see their pathetic defense force scrambling to respond. 40 ships. Perhaps 45. It was almost insulting. "Commander," his tactical officer Crix reported, "we are receiving a transmission from the third planet." Zyrax made a gesture of amusement. "Let us hear their pleas." The main view screen flickered, and a human face appeared. It belonged to a female of their species, though Zyrax had never bothered to learn much about human biology. She had gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that suggested age. Her uniform was simple and dark, decorated with small metal symbols that probably indicated rank. "Attention, unidentified fleet," the human said. Her voice was calm and steady, showing no trace of the fear Zyrax expected. "You have entered sovereign human space. This is your only warning. Reverse course immediately or face complete annihilation. There will be no second warning. There will be no negotiation after this moment." The bridge fell silent for a moment. Then Zyrax began to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the command center. His officers joined him, their own laughter mixing with his. The idea that these primitive creatures could threaten the Velthari Empire was simply too absurd to take seriously. On Earth, Admiral Katie Morgan watched the alien commander laugh at her warning. She had expected this. In fact, she had counted on it. Katie was 53 years old. She had been born in a small town in Montana, raised by parents who had taught her the value of patience and preparation. She had joined the military at 18, risen through the ranks through skill and determination, and had spent the last 20 years preparing for this exact moment. 20 years ago, a Velthari scout ship had entered the solar system. The humans had destroyed it before it could report back, but not before they had downloaded its entire database. They had learned everything about the Velthari Empire. They had seen the records of conquered worlds. They had watched the footage of entire species being enslaved or exterminated. And they had begun to prepare. No response from the alien fleet admiral. Lieutenant Danny Reyes reported from his communications station. He was young, barely 25, but his hands were steady on his controls. They appeared to be continuing their approach. "Of course they are," Katie said quietly. She turned to look at the main display, where 800 red dots moved slowly toward the inner planets. "They see what we want them to see." What the Velthari saw was a species that had barely begun to explore its own solar system. They saw primitive fusion reactors and chemical rockets. They saw electromagnetic shields that would collapse under the first volley of Velthari weapons. They saw a civilization that posed no threat whatsoever. They did not see what lay hidden beneath the surface of 1,000 asteroids. They did not see the weapons platforms disguised as space debris. They did not see the true power of Earth's fleet, hidden behind carefully constructed shells of fake technology. Commander Zyrax ended the transmission without bothering to respond. The human female's face disappeared from his screen, replaced by the tactical display showing his fleet's approach vector. "Continue on course," he ordered. "We will reach their primary world in 18 standard hours." Begin preparations for planetary bombardment. His officers moved to obey. Around him, the great warship hummed with power as it pushed deeper into human space. Behind him, 799 other vessels followed in perfect formation. Crix approached his commander with a datapad. "Sir, I have completed my analysis of the human defensive capabilities. Their largest vessel appears to be roughly equivalent to one of our light frigates. Their weapons are primarily kinetic and low-yield nuclear. They do not appear to possess energy shields of any significant strength." Zyrax took the datapad and glanced at it briefly. Disappointing. I had hoped for at least some entertainment. "There is one thing that concerns me, Commander." Zyrax looked up, his 4 eyes narrowing. "Speak." "The human who delivered the warning." She showed no fear. "None at all." Crix paused, choosing his words carefully. "In my experience, prey that does not fear the predator is either very foolish or very dangerous." "Or both," Zyrax replied with a dismissive gesture. "These humans have never faced a true enemy. They do not know what fear is. They will learn." On Earth, Katie Morgan had left the command center and was walking through the underground corridors of the United Nations Space Command headquarters. The facility was buried 2 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains, protected by layers of rock and metal and energy shields that the Veltri scanners could not detect. She stopped at a window that looked out into a massive underground hangar. Inside, technicians swarmed over a ship that looked nothing like the primitive vessels the Veltri had seen. It was sleek and dark, its hull lined with weapon systems that had been developed in absolute secrecy over 4 decades. Sergeant Becky Cole joined her at the window. The young woman was Katie's aide, one of the few people who knew the full extent of humanity's preparations. "They didn't turn back," Becky said. "No," Katie agreed. "They never do. Do you think they would have? If they had known what was waiting for them?" Katie considered the question. She thought about the 17 species the Veltri had destroyed. She thought about the billions of lives that had been lost because no one had been able to stop the Empire's advance. "No," she said finally. "They wouldn't have turned back. The Veltri don't understand the concept of an equal. To them, every other species is either a master or a slave." She turned away from the window. "They're about to learn that humans are neither." She began walking again, her footsteps echoing in the corridor. "Send the signal to all defense platforms. Wake everything up. And contact Captain Laura Bennett on the Defiance." Katie's voice was cold now, hard as steel. "Tell her it's time." Above them, 800 Veltri warships continued their approach, completely unaware that they were flying into the most elaborate trap in the history of the galaxy. Commander Zyrax had conquered many worlds in his long career. He had seen species react to invasion in every possible way. Some fought with desperate courage. Some fled in panic. Some surrendered immediately, hoping for mercy that would never come. But he had never seen anything like what the humans were doing. They were doing nothing. The Veltri fleet had been traveling through the human solar system for 12 hours now. They had passed the outer planets and were approaching the asteroid belt. In all that time, the human defense fleet had not moved. There had been no more communications. No evacuation ships fleeing the inner planets. No last-minute negotiations or desperate attacks. Just silence. Crix stood at his station, his clawed hands moving nervously over his controls. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the way the silence pressed against the hull of the ship. He had studied hundreds of invasion records, and nothing in any of them matched what was happening now. "Commander," he said carefully, "I am detecting no signs of civilian evacuation from Earth or their Mars colony." Zyrax turned to look at him. "Perhaps they have accepted their fate. Perhaps." Crix hesitated. "Or perhaps they are waiting for something. Waiting for what? A miracle?" Zyrax laughed, but there was less humor in it than before. They have 40 ships. We have 800. What could they possibly be waiting for? On the bridge of the USS Defiance, Captain Laura Bennett stood perfectly still and watched the Valkyrie fleet approach. Her ship was positioned near Mars orbit, along with the rest of the human defense force. To the Valkyrie sensors, they appeared to be exactly what they pretended to be: primitive vessels with weak shields and weaker weapons. Laura was 41 years old. She had brown hair cut short for convenience and brown eyes that missed nothing. She had commanded the Defiance for 3 years, but she had been training for this moment her entire life. Every officer in the human fleet had. They had run simulations of this battle thousands of times. They knew exactly what was going to happen. Her first officer, Commander Nick Torres, stood beside her. He was a tall man with a calm voice and steady nerves. He had been Laura's friend since their academy days, and there was no one she trusted more. "They're entering the asteroid belt," Nick reported quietly. Laura nodded. The asteroid belt was the first layer of humanity's true defenses. For 40 years, robots had been working in secret, turning thousands of asteroids into weapons platforms. Each one was disguised to look like ordinary rock, invisible to Valkyrie sensors. Each one was packed with enough firepower to destroy a cruiser. But not yet. The trap would not close until the Valkyrie were deep inside the solar system. Until there was no chance of escape. "Status of the crew?" Laura asked. "Ready, Captain. Everyone knows their role." Laura allowed herself a small smile. Her crew had trained for years for this moment. They had practiced every maneuver, memorized every system. When the time came, they would perform perfectly. Back on the Valkyrie flagship, Xerax's unease was growing. He had ordered his scouts to sweep the asteroid belt ahead of the fleet, looking for hidden defenses. They had found nothing, just rocks and ice and empty space. But the silence continued. "Try to open communications with the humans again," he ordered. Crix worked his controls. "No response, Commander. Their channels are open, but they are not answering." "They're watching us," Xerax muttered. "They're just sitting there, watching us approach, and doing nothing." He walked to the observation window and stared out at the stars. Somewhere ahead, the small blue world, called Earth, was waiting. It looked peaceful, innocent, weak. So why couldn't he shake the feeling that he was missing something? On Earth, deep beneath the surface, Admiral Katie Morgan sat in her command chair and watched the Valkyrie fleet enter the asteroid belt. Around her, hundreds of officers worked their stations, tracking every enemy ship, monitoring every defensive system, waiting for her order. The main display showed a real-time map of the entire solar system. The Valkyrie fleet appeared as a tight cluster of red dots, moving slowly toward the inner planets. And scattered throughout the system, hidden from enemy sensors, were thousands of green dots. Weapons platforms, disguised warships, defense stations buried in moons and asteroids. The true strength of humanity. "Admiral," Lieutenant Danny Reyes called out, "the enemy fleet has entered the primary engagement zone." Katie nodded slowly. "Status of all defensive systems?" "All platforms are at full power and ready to engage. Fleet reports combat ready. Ground-based weapons are standing by." Sergeant Becky Cole leaned close to Katie's ear. "Admiral, are you sure we should let them get this close? If something goes wrong..." "Nothing will go wrong," Katie said firmly. "We've had 40 years to prepare for this moment. Every system has been tested 1,000 times. Every officer knows their role." She looked at the tactical display, at the 800 enemy ships that were about to learn the truth about humanity. "Besides," Katie continued, "we need them deep inside the system. We need to destroy every single ship. If even one escapes to warn the Empire, they might send a larger fleet next time. And if the Empire sends a larger fleet anyway, Katie's expression didn't change. Then they'll discover that what they're about to face is just a fraction of what we've built. She stood up and walked to the center of the command room. Around her, hundreds of eyes turned to watch their admiral. Katie took a deep breath. "Open a channel to all forces," she ordered. "This is Admiral Morgan. For 40 years, we have watched the Velthari Empire conquer and destroy. We have seen species wiped from existence. We have prepared in secret, waiting for the day when they would come for us." Her voice carried across the solar system, reaching every ship and every weapons platform. "That day is here. In a few hours, the Velthari fleet will reach the engagement point. When they do, we will show them who we really are. We will teach them that humanity does not surrender, that humanity does not flee, that humanity does not beg for mercy." She paused, her eyes hard. They wanted a conquest. "We're going to give them a lesson they will never forget. All forces, prepare for battle. And may whatever gods you believe in have mercy on our enemies." The channel closed. Katie returned to her command chair and sat down. "Now," she said quietly, "we wait." Commander Zyrax stood on his bridge, watching the tactical display with growing frustration. His fleet was only hours away from Earth now. Victory was within reach. And yet something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, in the way the silence seemed to press against him from all sides. But he had come too far to turn back now. His emperor expected victory. The Velthari Empire expected a new slave world to add to its collection. Zyrax would not disappoint them. "All ships," he commanded, "increase speed. I want to reach Earth before the end of the day cycle." His fleet obeyed, pushing deeper into the trap that was about to close around them. The Velthari scout ships Razor, Storm, and Victory were running a standard patrol ahead of the main fleet when they simply vanished. One moment they were there, transmitting their usual reports. The next moment they were gone. No distress calls. No explosions visible on sensors. Just empty space where 3 warships had been. Crick stared at his tactical display, trying to understand what he was seeing. His clawed hands trembled slightly as he checked the readings again and again. The results were always the same. "Commander," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we've lost contact with our forward scouts." Zyrax turned sharply. "What do you mean, lost contact?" "They're gone, sir. All 3 ships. They just disappeared. Ships don't just disappear." Zyrax strode across the bridge to look at the tactical display himself. The 3 green dots that had represented his scouts were no longer there. In their place was nothing but empty space. What happened to them? Before Crix could answer, the tactical display began to change. Across the entire solar system, new energy signatures were appearing. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Thousands. They were everywhere. In the asteroid belt. On the moons of the giant planets. Floating in the empty spaces between worlds. A web of power that had been invisible moments before was suddenly blazing across every sensor on every Velthari ship. "Commander," Crix said, his voice now shaking with something very close to fear, "I am reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. They weren't there before. They just appeared." Zyrax felt something cold settle in his stomach. "How many?" Crix's 4 eyes went wide as he read the numbers. "Thousands, sir. Tens of thousands. The asteroid belt alone contains over 50,000 active weapons platforms. That's impossible. Our sensors would have detected them. They were hidden, Commander. Disguised as rocks, debris, inactive satellites." Crix looked up at his commander, and for the first time in his career, Zyrax saw genuine terror in his officer's eyes. The entire solar system is a trap. On the bridge of the USS Defiance, Captain Laura Bennett felt her ship begin to transform around her. The outer hull panels that had been designed to make the vessel look primitive were being ejected into space. The fake components that had hidden their true technology were falling away like a snake shedding its skin. All systems coming online, Commander Nick Torres reported, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Weapons at full power. Shields at maximum. Engine output is now at 100%. Lavra watched her tactical display as similar transformations happened across the human fleet. 40 ships that had seemed weak and primitive were revealing their true forms. Each one was a masterpiece of secret engineering, built in hidden shipyards on the dark side of the moon and in the ice caves of distant moons. Each one carried weapons that made Valkyrie technology look like children's toys. The Defiance is now at full combat capability, Nick announced. All 42 vessels in the fleet reporting ready for engagement. Lavra nodded. Open a channel to all forces. And to the Valkyrie fleet. The channel opened, and Laura's face appeared on every view screen in the solar system, including the bridge of Commander Zyrax's flagship. Attention, Valkyrie Invasion Force, Lavra said. Her voice was calm and cold. You were warned. You chose to ignore that warning. Now you will face the consequences. On the Valkyrie flagship, Zyrax watched in horror as the human ships transformed before his eyes. The primitive vessels he had dismissed were gone. In their place were sleek, powerful warships, unlike anything he had ever seen. Their hulls were dark and predatory, covered in weapon systems he couldn't even identify. Their energy signatures were enormous, far beyond anything the Valkyrie Empire could produce. No, he whispered. This is not possible. But the tactical display told the truth. The human fleet had been hiding its true power all along. And it wasn't just the ships. Throughout the solar system, hidden weapons platforms were activating. On the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, massive doors were opening to reveal planet-killing cannons. In the asteroid belt, thousands of automated platforms were locking onto Valkyrie targets. Commander, Crick said desperately, we need to retreat. We need to get out of here now. But even as he spoke, the trap finished closing. The human weapons platforms behind the Valkyrie fleet activated, sealing off the escape route. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Valkyrie fleet was surrounded. Admiral Katie Morgan watched the moment of realization dawn across the enemy fleet. She could imagine the fear spreading through 800 warships as the truth became clear. They had been so confident, so arrogant, so certain that nothing could stand against them. Admiral, Lieutenant Danny Reyes reported, all forces are in position. The enemy fleet is completely surrounded. They have no escape route. Katie nodded slowly. What about their communications? Can they send a message to their empire? No, ma'am. We're jamming all outgoing signals. Nothing is getting out of this system. Good. The Valkyrie Empire would not learn what had happened here. At least, not until humanity was ready to tell them. Status of the enemy fleet? Katie asked. Sergeant Becky Cole checked her display. They're in chaos, Admiral. Their ships are breaking formation. Some are trying to retreat, but our platforms are blocking them. Others are attempting to charge our fleet, but they're too scattered to be effective. Katie stood up and walked to the main tactical display. 800 red dots were surrounded by thousands of green ones. The Valkyrie had brought an invasion force. Humanity had built a killing field. Open a channel to all forces, Katie ordered. This is Admiral Morgan. This is Admiral Morgan. This is Admiral Morgan. The enemy has entered the engagement zone. All platforms, all ships, all defensive systems. She paused, letting the moment settle. You may fire at will. Throughout the solar system, humanity's hidden arsenal came to life. In the asteroid belt, 50,000 weapons platforms opened fire simultaneously. Beams of concentrated energy lanced across space, each one capable of cutting through Velthury shields like a hot knife through butter. Missiles launched by the thousands, their warheads armed with antimatter charges that the Velthury had never encountered. On the moons of the outer planets, enormous cannons that had been building up power for years discharged their fury. Each shot was powerful enough to destroy a battleship. Each cannon could fire again within seconds. And in the void between worlds, the human fleet attacked with weapons that made Velthury technology look like ancient history. Private First Class Tony Ruiz sat at his weapons station on Platform Delta 7, a hidden base buried in a rock that the Velthury had dismissed as worthless debris. He was 22 years old, born in Texas, raised on stories of what the Velthury had done to other species. He had joined the Space Defense Force at 18 and had spent 4 years training for this moment. Now, as his targeting computer locked onto an enemy cruiser, he felt nothing but calm certainty. "Target acquired," he said quietly. Firing. The beam that left his platform traveled at nearly the speed of light. It struck the Velthury cruiser's shield and passed through as if the shield wasn't there. It carved through the hull like a surgeon's blade, splitting the ship in two. Secondary explosions bloomed as the cruiser's reactor lost containment. Tony was already targeting his next victim before the first one finished dying. Target acquired. Firing. Across the solar system, 10,000 soldiers, just like Tony, were doing the exact same thing. Commander Zyrax watched his fleet die and understood, at last, the true depth of his mistake. Commander Zyrax stood on his bridge as the world came apart around him. Alarms screamed from every station. Officers shouted reports that blurred together into a meaningless wall of noise. On the tactical display, the red dots that represented his fleet were winking out one by one, like stars being swallowed by darkness. "We've lost the Devastator," Crix reported, his voice cracking. "And the Conqueror. And the Divine Wrath. Commander, we've lost 200 ships in the first 10 minutes. Zyrax said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had led 800 warships into the system. He had expected an easy victory, a quick conquest, another trophy for the Velthury Empire. Instead, he had led his fleet into the most sophisticated trap in the history of the galaxy. "Return fire," he finally managed to shout. "All ships, return fire on the nearest human targets." His remaining vessels obeyed, their weapons lancing out toward the human fleet. But the results were meaningless. Human shields absorbed Velthury weapons' fire like a sponge absorbing water. The beams that had conquered 17 star systems splashed harmlessly against barriers that should not have existed. "Their shields are too strong," a weapons officer reported desperately. "Our weapons can't penetrate them. Nothing is getting through." Captain Laura Bennett watched from the bridge of the Defiance as her ship carved through the enemy fleet. Her weapons officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Amy Foster, was targeting enemy vessels with mechanical precision. Each shot was a kill. Each kill was vengeance for a species the Velthury had destroyed. "3 more cruisers down," Amy reported. "Targeting the next group." "Casualties?" Lavra asked. Commander Nick Torres checked his display. "None on our ship. Fleet reports minimal casualties across all vessels. The enemy weapons can't penetrate our shields." Lavra nodded. This was exactly what they had planned. For 40 years, humanity had studied captured Velthury technology. They had learned every weakness, every flaw, every limitation. Then they had built weapons designed specifically to exploit those weaknesses. The result was visible on every screen. Velthury ships were dying by the dozen, unable to defend themselves, unable to fight back, unable to run. Their proud fleet was being reduced to debris with each passing minute. On Earth, Admiral Katie Morgan watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. Her tactical display showed the steady reduction of the enemy fleet. 700 ships remaining. 600. 500. The numbers fell like leaves in autumn. Status report, she ordered. Lieutenant Commander Greg Palmer checked his console. Enemy fleet at approximately 400 vessels, Admiral. Human casualties across all forces. 18 killed, 43 wounded. All human vessels remain operational. 18 killed. Out of the hundreds of thousands of personnel manning the defense network, against an enemy that had expected to slaughter billions. Continue the attack, Katie said quietly. No mercy. No survivors. She knew the words were harsh. She knew that some would call her cruel for refusing to accept a surrender. But she remembered the footage from the Valkyrie database. She remembered seeing entire worlds burned to ash. She remembered the screams of species being exterminated because they had dared to exist. The Valkyrie had never shown mercy to their victims. Katie would not show mercy to them. Commander Zyrax finally understood that there was no hope of victory. His fleet had been reduced to less than half its original strength, and the humans had barely suffered a scratch. Their weapons were too powerful. Their defenses were too strong. Every tactic he tried was countered before it could begin. We have to surrender, he said, the words bitter in his mouth. Open a channel to the human fleet. Tell them we yield. Crix looked at him with something like hope. Yes, Commander. At once, the channel opened, and Zyrax's face appeared on the screens of the human command center. Admiral Katie Morgan looked at him with eyes that held no warmth, no pity, no compassion. Human forces, Zyrax said, forcing the words out. We surrender. We ask for mercy. Please, stop this attack. We yield to your authority. There was a long moment of silence. Katie's expression did not change. I told you in my warning, she said finally. There would be no negotiation after that moment. There would be no second chance. Please, Zyrax begged. He had never begged for anything in his life, but now he was ready to do whatever it took to save what remained of his fleet. We didn't understand. We didn't know what you were capable of. We thought you were weak. You thought we were prey, Katie corrected him. You came here to enslave us, to add our world to your collection, to do to humanity what you did to the Kurix and the Novan and a dozen other species. She leaned forward slightly. You were warned. You could have turned back. You chose to continue. That choice has consequences. The channel remained open, and Zyrax watched in horror as the human admiral gave her next order. All forces, continue the attack. Reduce the enemy fleet to 200 vessels. We need some survivors to carry a message. The massacre continued. Private Tony Ruiz had lost count of how many Valkyrie ships he had destroyed. His weapons platform had fired hundreds of times, and each shot had found its mark. Around him, his fellow soldiers were doing the same. The asteroid belt had become a killing field, filled with the wreckage of ships that had once conquered worlds. Target acquired, he said, for what felt like the 1,000th time. Firing. Another Valkyrie destroyer split apart under the impact of his weapon. Tony felt nothing as he watched it die. No joy, no satisfaction. Just the cold certainty that this was necessary. That these invaders had to be destroyed so that humanity could survive. Platform control, this is Admiral Morgan, came a voice over his communication system. Cease fire on my command. We're approaching the survival threshold. Tony's hands hovered over his controls, waiting. All forces, cease fire. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Across the solar system, 10,000 weapons platforms went quiet. The human fleet stopped firing. The asteroid belt fell still. Commander Zyrax looked at his tactical display with disbelief. His fleet had been reduced from 800 ships to just over 200. More than 2 million Valkyrie soldiers were dead. The wreckage of their vessels filled the solar system like a new asteroid field. And the humans had won without losing a single ship. "Commander," Crick said weakly, "they've stopped firing. What are your orders?" Zyrax had no orders to give. He was no longer a commander. He was barely even a survivor. He was simply a broken leader of a broken fleet, waiting to see what the humans would do next. The view screen flickered, and Admiral Katie Morgan's face appeared once more. "Commander Zyrax," she said, "listen carefully. I am going to let some of your ships survive. Not many. Just enough to carry a message back to your empire." "What message?" Zyrax asked, his voice hollow. Katie's eyes were cold as winter stars. "The message that humanity is not prey. That we are not victims. That we have been preparing for you for 40 years, and everything you've seen today is just a fraction of what we've built." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Tell your emperor that if the Velthari Empire ever enters human space again, we will not stop at destroying your fleet. We will come for your worlds. We will come for your colonies. We will come for everything you have ever built." She leaned back slightly. "We gave you one warning. You ignored it. There will not be a second chance." The channel closed, and Commander Zyrax was left alone with the ruins of his fleet and the weight of the greatest defeat in Velthari history. 3 days had passed since the Battle of Sol, the wreckage of the Velthari. Invasion fleets still drifted through the solar system, a silent monument to the greatest military disaster in the history of the Empire. And in the middle of that wreckage, 112 Velthari ships waited for permission to leave. Commander Zyrax stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship. The vessel had survived the battle, but just barely. Its weapons were destroyed. Its shields were gone. Its engines had enough power for exactly one hyperspace jump. When his ship left this system, it would never fly again. Around him, the remnants of his crew worked in silence. They had entered this system with pride and confidence. They were leaving as broken survivors, carrying a story that would shame the Velthari Empire for generations to come. "Commander," Crick said quietly, "the human escort vessel is approaching." Zyrax looked out the viewport and saw the USS Defiance gliding toward them. Even now, after everything that had happened, he could not help but feel a chill at the sight of the human warship. It moved through space with the easy grace of a predator that had nothing to fear. Its weapons, though powered down, were still clearly visible along its hull, a constant reminder of what the humans could do if they chose. Captain Lavra Bennett's voice came over the communication channel. "Attention, Velthari Fleet. You have been granted permission to depart human space. You will proceed on the designated course at reduced speed. Any deviation will be interpreted as a hostile act and will be dealt with accordingly." "We understand," Zyrax replied. There was nothing else to say. The Velthari ships began to move, crawling toward the edge of the solar system at a speed that would have been embarrassing under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances. These were the circumstances of total defeat. On the Defiance, Commander Nick Torres watched the enemy fleet begin its long journey home. "They look so small now," he observed. "Hard to believe they thought they could conquer us." Captain Laura Bennett nodded slowly. "They came from a position of strength. They had conquered 17 star systems. They had never lost a battle. Why would they believe that a species they had never heard of could defeat them? They should have listened to the warning. Yes, they should have." Lavra thought about the battle, about the 18 human soldiers who had died in the fighting, 18 out of more than 200,000 who had manned the defensive network. It was a tiny number by any military standard. And yet, to the families of those 18, it was everything. She had already written 18 letters to 18 families. Each one had been difficult. Each one had been necessary. "Captain," her communications officer reported, We're receiving a transmission from Earth. Admiral Morgan wants to speak with you. Lavra moved to her command chair. Put her through. Admiral Katie Morgan's face appeared on the main view screen. She looked tired but satisfied. The burden of 40 years of preparation had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Captain Bennett, Katie said, excellent work on the escort duty. How are the Velthari behaving? They're doing exactly as instructed, Admiral. I don't think they have any fight left in them. I don't imagine they do. Katie paused, her expression becoming thoughtful. I wanted to let you know that the United Nations has scheduled a press conference for tomorrow. I'll be addressing the world and, through our communication satellites, the galaxy. I thought you might want to know what I'm planning to say. Lavra listened as the Admiral outlined her speech. It was not a speech of celebration or triumph. It was a speech of warning, a declaration to every spacefaring species in the galaxy that humanity was not to be attacked, that Earth and its colonies were protected by weapons that could destroy entire fleets, that any attempt at conquest would be met with overwhelming force. Do you think they'll listen? Lavra asked when the Admiral finished. Katie's smile was thin and cold. Some will, some won't. But after today, no one will be able to claim they didn't know what we were capable of. Commander Zyrax's fleet reached the edge of the solar system after 18 hours of travel. Throughout that time, the human warship had followed them, watching them, making sure they didn't try anything foolish. Now, finally, they were at the boundary of human space. We're ready to jump to hyperspace, Crix reported. His voice was flat and exhausted. Should I give the order? Zyrax was about to respond when his communication console lit up. The Defiance was sending one final message. Captain Laura Bennett's face appeared on his screen. She looked at him with eyes that held neither hatred nor pity, just cold, steady determination. Commander Zyrax, she said, before you leave, I want you to understand something. What is that? We didn't enjoy this. We didn't want this war. We spent 40 years hoping that you would never come, that we would never have to use the weapons we built. Lavra paused, letting the words sink in. But when you came, we were ready. And we will always be ready. Zyrax felt something twist in his chest. Shame, perhaps? Or regret. He had led 2 million soldiers to their deaths because he had refused to take the humans seriously, because he had been too arrogant to listen to a simple warning. I understand, he said quietly. We will not return. I hope you're right. Laura's expression softened slightly. Tell your Emperor something for me. Tell him that humanity has no desire for war. We don't want your territory or your resources. We just want to be left alone. And if we don't leave you alone, then we'll do what we did today. And we'll keep doing it until there's nothing left of the Velthari Empire. Laura straightened in her chair. Go home, Commander. Tell your people what happened here. And make sure they never forget. The channel closed. Zyrax stared at the blank screen for a long moment, then turned to Crix. Take us home, he ordered. The Velthari fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving the solar system forever. On Earth, Admiral Katie Morgan stood before the United Nations General Assembly. Representatives from every nation watched as she delivered her address. And through translation technology that broadcast across the stars, countless other species listened as well. 3 days ago, Katie began, an invasion force from the Velthari Empire entered our solar system. They came with 800 warships and over 2 million soldiers. They believed they would conquer humanity easily, as they had conquered so many others before us. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the assembly. They were wrong. Images appeared on the screens behind her. The Velthari fleet before the battle. The same fleet after. The destruction was absolute, undeniable. A statement that needed no words. For 40 years, humanity prepared in secret. We built weapons. We trained soldiers. We created defenses that would make any invasion impossible. Katie's voice grew stronger. We did not want war. We hoped it would never come. But we knew that if it did, we would be ready. She turned to face the camera broadcasting to the galaxy. This is our message to every species in known space. Humanity is not prey. We are not victims. We are not a species that surrenders or runs or begs for mercy. We are the people who built a trap for an empire and watched that empire walk right into it. Katie thought about the 18 soldiers who had died, about the billions of humans who had lived their lives never knowing about the secret war their species was preparing to fight, about the generations that would come after, inheriting a galaxy that now knew what humanity was capable of. To those who would threaten us, we will give you one warning. Only one. If you ignore it, you will face the same fate as the Valkyrie fleet. There will be no mercy. There will be no negotiation. There will only be consequences. She straightened, her shoulders square and her head high. Humanity has spoken. Let the galaxy listen. The broadcast ended. Across the stars, in throne rooms and council chambers and military headquarters, leaders of 100 species heard the message. Some dismissed it as human arrogance. Some took it as a deadly serious warning. And in the cold depths of space, the survivors of the Valkyrie invasion fleet carried their story home, spreading the tale of the day they had learned what humanity truly was. The tale of the invading fleet that ignored humanity's warning. Their final mistake.